Guys, number one Marmaduke fan here. Still working my way through the LGBTQ section at the local library. So these two actually go pretty well together. We've got Super Late Bloomer, My Early Days in Transition, an Up and Out collection by Julia Kay, and Genderqueer, a memoir by Maya Kobabe. So Super Late Bloomer, I actually kind of saw, I used to read Up and Out, so I kind of saw in real time when Julia came out as trans. One of the interesting things about this is Julia is I know I'm going to get myself in trouble one of these days. Like cancel culture is going to come for me, but a theme of this channel is I made this channel because I was sick of not talking about these issues, so I am going to talk about them in the way that feels most natural to me without censoring myself. And if that offends you, I'm asking you to go along with me on this trip because I'm actually trying to read this stuff. I've read some of the more serious academic stuff, so now I'm trying to read some of like the more down-to-earth stuff to see how it trickles out to the culture. So I'm going to use the pronouns I am comfortable with using. Julia was born a man and wants to identify as a woman. I'm going to use the he pronoun. Genderqueer, Maya Kobabe, is a young woman who did not want to identify as a woman. She talks about wanting to identify as a man and then not being sure if she wants to identify as a man, so she settled on air as her pronouns. Now, the second I use the incorrect pronoun, for a lot of people that kind of ends the conversation right there. They demand that I use the pronouns as a sign of respect. And I spent a lot of time thinking about this. Would I, if I was having a one-on-one conversation with a person and they demanded that I use the pronouns just as a prerequisite of having the conversation, and I wanted to actually have like a in-depth, honest, direct conversation with them, would I use the pronouns even then? And I'm not sure I would use the pronouns even then. I think I would have to say, I love you, I respect you as a person. You're made in the image of God, but I can't in good conscience use what I believe to be incorrect pronouns. If we're going to have a conversation about pronouns, then let's have that conversation. But I can't check myself as a prerequisite. Now, I'll even like not use pronouns as a concession to you. If using what you say are the wrong pronouns hurts you emotionally, then out of respect for you, I won't use pronouns at all. But don't ask me to use the wrong pronouns, because basically there's a give and take to this. Since my religious beliefs have a huge impact on the way I perceive gender, you asking me to use these pronouns is a direct challenge to my religious beliefs, right? So if me challenging you about these pronouns, if you perceive that as an attack on your identity and what you believe to be true, I perceive you demanding I use your pronouns as an attack on my religion. Now, if you say it's not my intent to attack your religion, I just want you to respect me, then part of that respect means we have to have mutual respect for one another. We have to recognize that our worldviews are in contrast to one another. This is a slamming of the worldviews up against each other. If we care about each other as human beings, then we've got to lay aside we got to lay aside like the cancel culture nonsense. We got to lay aside like the sort of easy knee jerk, like, oh boy, I'm so better than you, right? And we actually have to like have a direct conversation one-on-one to each other. And I feel like the forced pronoun issue or the mandatory use these pronouns or else issue prevents these kind of conversations from happening at all, which means that if someone is an objector and they're scared of getting cancel culture, their only recourse is like to go to 4chan and just wallow in how depressed they are and go and sink further and further and further into like the 4chan, far right culture. I definitely see, like you've heard me make a few videos talking about groypers and the alt-right. I definitely see the alt-right as an emerging problem that is partially emerging in response to kind of racial identity politics and gender identity politics. So it's going to be more and more important for us to actually have frank conversations, which means you have to have a conversation with people who aren't going to automatically assume that your pronouns are the correct ones to use. All right? So with that long disclaimer out of the way, let's talk about what I gleaned from these. So number one, I'm not sure that these should be in youth library sections at all. Like, wouldn't it be weird if there was lolly hentai in the youth section of the manga library? That would be weird, right? So I don't think I'm a prude if I say graphic sex depictions, regardless if it's lolly hentai or whether it's like autobio comics. I don't think we should be putting that in a place where it's immediately accessible to kids, like right next to the Batman and Mickey Mouse books. I'm not a prude. I don't like censorship, so I don't want these like, burned or kicked out of the library. I want books to exist and allowed to be distributed without being burned, right? But I do think there's some common sense to saying that you don't put the pornographic novels right next to Mickey Mouse. You don't put the content with explicit sexual content right next to Batman. These should be, I think libraries should just basically have an adult section where, I don't know, they don't get lolly hentai at all. I guess Big Mouth sort of illustrates this, where Big Mouth has like 12-year-olds engaging in sexual content, and people seem to think it's less weird if the style is ugly and Western than if it's cute and anime. And I kind of look at them both as the same type of thing. This is graphic sexual content, in genderqueer, not so much in Super Late Bloomer. I feel like it's perfectly fine for libraries to have that, for adults to talk about it, but I really severely dislike the promotion of this to young people on like gay day. So in genderqueer, like she wears a strap-on dick at one point and has one of her like girlfriends suck the dick. Right? Would it be better or worse if it was like a cutesy bootsy like anime fan service thing? It's the same type of problem. All right, so let's actually get into it. So Super Late Bloomer, the first thing I noticed is that in the Up and Out comics that were public, Julia put like a real happy face on it and drew himself as a very cute woman. And in Super Late Bloomer, these are a little bit more raw and immediate, like Private Diary comics. And he expresses throughout the entire book this intense feeling of grief, I'd say, that he wants to be a woman, and every time he looks at himself in the mirror, he feels like a man playing dress up. And once in a while, he'll look at himself and he'll feel like he looks like a woman, sounds like a woman, and that's like the moment he's hoping for. That's the moment that's giving him joy. But what's kind of shocking about it is almost all of his family is supportive, except for one unnamed person. Sometimes people are supportive and say, yeah, you do your thing, but they don't really get what the whole transgender movement is, so they say things that are kind of like accidentally offensive or microaggressions towards him. I guess kind of like the lesson of Super Late Bloomer is it's not all fun, happy rainbow sauce, which is sometimes what it is in kind of like millennial culture, where you're like always, I feel like millennials try to like prop themselves up a lot with a lot of the yay me stuff, and that's really, or yay, I'm adulting, and that's the fig leaf for not feeling like they're doing anything right and everything's falling apart around them. So Super Late Bloomer is sad because most of it is Julia looking in the mirror, feeling like a man in drag and feeling bad. So these two comics kind of illustrate what's most important to me is the philosophical and religious aspect of it. So when we talk about these issues, I think we tend to hyperfixate on just like the LGBTQ thing or the Supreme Court angle or what's in the news or the gay march or the bathroom debate or this religious liberty case, when I feel like postmodernism actually is the bigger, more important overarching issue, where if you're trans or you're gay and you know that postmodernism is cancer, I feel like I have more in common with you than like a straight or a cis person who doesn't understand what postmodernism is. Like I feel like it's almost like part of the reason why I sympathize with gay and trans people is I kind of see them as tripping and falling into a worldview that makes sense to them from their perspective, but then it just creates a whole new set of problems for them. Like postmodernism can never make you happy because it's all about deconstructing common narrative. So you think that you're finding yourself, you're coming out, you're being who you are by embracing an LGBTQ philosophy, but this are like the hidden nugget that comes with that. It's almost like it is a religion. This is a religion for a culture that has moved past Christianity and embraced atheism, but human beings are religious, so they can't just accept atheism, they can't just accept Darwinism, they need something which fulfills that place in their lives. And I think LGBTQ activism is becoming a thing like religion for like post-Christian young people, where like old boomer atheists don't even know how to talk to them about this kind of stuff. So Julia writes, I tend to engage in black and white thinking. I felt great today, but I'm either on top of the world or being crushed by it. I guess I'm starting to recognize I need to work on seeing shades of gray. And so, talking to a female friend, cis women can have deep voices and nobody questions their femininity. I keep thinking back to that conversation a few days ago. You don't have to change yours. Maybe my dysphoria stems from internalized transphobia. Maybe I don't need to raise the pitch of my voice. I'm not less of a woman for it. So, here's the question: why would you first start identifying as trans and then start talking in these philosophical social categories? Well, I think it's because it presents postmodernism presents LGBTQ theory to you as like an explanation of who you are and how you'll find peace for yourself. You feel like you have this sense of misery or depression because you feel like you're a man trapped in a woman's body. Well, our theory explains to you like the evils of patriarchy, the evils of cis heteronormativity. We're going to build towards a utopia where you can feel comfortable with yourself, but we never actually get to that utopia. Now, poor Julia still has like this problem of not feeling like a woman, but now Julia also is being told that she has internalized misogyny for feeling like she should be a woman. So which is it? Do you want to feel like a woman and have a pretty voice and look like a pretty woman in the mirror? Or is it internalized misogyny to think that way? And later on, much later in the book, Julia is still thinking about these same problems and still wondering in his own mind if he has internalized misogyny for thinking this thing. So all this is really done is Julia says that identifying as a woman has made him happier, but now he's got like a whole new set of things upsetting him and making him like deeply doubt himself. Sometimes a quiet voice in the back of my mind speaks up. You'll never be anything but a feminized man. Internalized transphobia is awful. So now the very voice that is communicating to you the desire to look like a woman is itself being explained as a phobia within your own mind, right? So are you a bigot? I don't think you feel like a bigot. This is Julia taking the language and the categories of postmodernism and applying it to his own internal psyche and judging himself based on that standard. I think that's just like making everything worse for you. And then look, one day later, one sandwich, please, I automatically raise the pitch of my voice when addressing strangers. So the thing that was misogynistic earlier, he still does naturally because he wants to be perceived as a woman, right? So obviously, like the big question from an identity perspective is, how can you identify as something if a theory says that that thing you want to identify as isn't a valid category? Like if I want to be a woman, don't women have to exist for me to want to be a woman, or am I just trapped forever in like this like long, lonely, endless series of questioning my own identity? So genderqueer kind of gets at this aspect of it where it's not as simple as Maya Kobabe isn't just like a woman who wants to identify as a man. She's a woman who's completely confused about what this means for herself. And so genderqueer or questioning kind of become good catch-all terms for people who, I think, can't solve the unsolvable problem. How can you want to identify as a man if you believe that being a man is a socially constructed category? So that's why the acronym keeps expanding. That's why there was a whole meme on Tumblr of inventing a gender based on some like colorful concept. Like my favorite was a gender inspired by Bog. Some of that might have been like 4chaners invading Tumblr and having a laugh at the expense of all this weird stuff, right? But the reason it went from 2 to 3 to 50 and then like 100 flags and multiple terms that seem to describe the same thing is because you're talking about something as complicated as identity and sexuality. Postmodernism and the LGBTQ framework can't give you a neat, tidy explanation for that. They're basically trying to answer young people's questions like, who am I? Why do I feel this way? What am I going to be when I grow up? What do I want from my life? And they're trying to answer that with a sort of left-wing progressive politics. But who I am, what do I want to be, those are too big of questions for them to neatly package. So they need escape routes. They need something like genderqueer or questioning or gender fluid, where you can kind of have that term mean what you want it to mean in a given situation, while they still... All right, so the best example I've seen of like a postmodern philosopher is Judith Butler, where she actually tries to tackle some of these topics like a philosopher, asking questions about truth. But the problem is that her essays are very verbose and she's obviously very intelligent, but they end up spiraling off into nothing because she's clearly trying to take a contradiction and make that sound like a non-contradiction somehow. Or maybe like instead of saying, well, maybe this question isn't that important, maybe we need to ask a different question, like how are we going to deconstruct the systems that create these problems for minorities, right? So if the philosophers are confused and they don't know how to explain it in any kind of sensible or rational way, then of course like the down to earth, hey, I like to make comics people, they're not going to be able to explain it any better. But Maya is taking these concepts and she's putting them in a package that is more digestible and maybe more sensible to a young person. Maybe just like as a completely leaving aside like the LGBTQ issues, I feel like genderqueer is a little verbose. Like it could have benefited from some editing and trimming. There's whole sections where I'm thinking, okay, I get it. You've kind of like rehashed this point a few times. But this is a really good example of kind of like the religious aspect of it, where atheism isn't enough. You need a spiritual context for these things. So if you're questioning your gender identity and like just biological evolution isn't enough for you, then you're not just going to say, I identify as some other gender. You're going to need some kind of like framework or belief system which gives you a sense of value and a sense of purpose. And in this case, it kind of like takes a pagan sort of context. So I do want to praise this. So Maya says when she's studying to get an MFA in comics, she's at first very hesitant to do anything that's nonfiction. My secrets are mine. So what the LGBTQ kind of artistic community does that the boomer right doesn't do is they talk about kind of unspeakable things or embarrassing things, which means that maybe like the person growing up in the red state who feels this way, feels lonely, they feel isolated, they feel like they can't talk to anybody about it. And so when they go looking for answers about those questions, you know, Maya Kobabe becomes the person who can talk to them about that. Maybe one of the points I have is in this is the reason I think boomers and the right should be reading this kind of stuff is we're at the point where we can't just talk about LGBTQ, whatever that means, as a political coalition, you know, despite all of the like different factions and the warring civil war within that movement. There are enough of them that you can't just say, oh, what a couple weird snowflakes on a college campus. It's sort of like if you were around when the Mormons first were around, like when there are 20 Mormons, you can kind of laugh and say, wow, what a weird cult. But then once the Mormons have basically their own state and they have all of their own colleges and massive church buildings and they're, you know, doing outreach all over the world, they become more significant. You can't hand wave it away. So maybe people 30 years ago could have like hand waved this stuff away or shrugged their shoulders and said, I don't get all this stuff. But we've kind of reached a critical mass where genderqueer LGBTQ issues are going to be the defining social issue for the 21st century. And people who don't buy into this, it's actually more important for them to be knowledgeable of this. I would say parents, especially who have a traditional or Christian belief system, it's absolutely essential, I think, that you understand as much of this as you possibly can, because this is going to be the world that your kids are going to be walking into in the next century. So what a person like Maya Kobabe does is she tells stories about her perspective, and I think her perspective is limited. I think it's almost tragic. It's like she's stuck in a worldview that's creating some of the problems for her, and she can't get out. I feel for her as a person. But by putting herself out there, she's able to communicate in a way that kind of like fuddy-duddy conservatives who are afraid to mention this stuff never can, because they're afraid to bring it up. They're afraid it's too taboo. We have to stop thinking of it as a taboo thing and start thinking of it as like a serious thing we have to talk about. So the tragedy number one is, I know she talks about her dad and her mom kind of being flower children, her mom kind of being a pagan, her dad being an old hippie. And both of them are professors. And at one point, she just mentioned she hadn't learned to read until she was 11 and did homeschooling. And I was just thinking, oh, no. Why are you being homeschooled and you haven't learned to read until you're 11 years old by your college-educated mom and dad? What's going on with that? And then she'll talk about how she felt ashamed of having boobs and felt ashamed of her periods. And so she'd try to go an entire day without using the bathroom, or she'd go weeks without changing her pad. I'm thinking, oh, no. Why aren't you talking to your parents about this, right? So it's like there's something wrong going on here developmentally. There's something wrong with the way you're being raised, or something wrong with the way you're dealing with your problems as a young person developmentally first. and then the gender issues start coming along later. So a lot of these are like the classic things, like why do girls have to wear a shirt to cover their chest? Why do girls have to shave their legs? And these are like really common questions, like why do people say boys shouldn't cry? Why do people say boys are slugs and snails and puppy dog tails, right? That you feel some sort of inadequacy in yourself. You feel like there's something wrong with the culture that tells you have to like pink or blue. But then it sort of jumps from that, which I actually think could be kind of like a valid way of thinking about yourself and who you are, to postmodernism, where you're now trapped forever, lost in a world of endless questions and no answers. So maybe one thing you could do is, the reason I think girls should shave their legs is a way of saying to boys, hey, you boys who like smooth legs, here's something nice I've done to attract your attention, right? So the basic answer to the question is to attract the attention of men. Why do men like smooth? I don't know, because they like feeling smooth things. Soft things are nice, and rough and furry things are kind of scary, and we don't like them, right? It's stupid. Maybe you think it's a stupid rule and you shouldn't have to follow it, but it actually has a reason. Now, Maya talks about how she never wants to have children, and she thinks she might be asexual, yet she has all these sexual fantasies about homosexual men. But if you're never going to have children, like if you're 100% convinced, and I'm not just saying like, oh, I'll never have kids, because I mean like you've actually like sat down and you've thought about it and you've realized, no, I can't have a family. Like I'm kind of at the point where I think I may not want to have a family because I want to just read all my life. But I had to sit down and think about that. Am I gonna be depressed later if I'm not a father? Do I need to be a father to be happy? And it took a lot of introspection and self-thought. Right? That can be very useful. I'm going on so many tangents here, but my point is like if you're a young girl and you don't think you're gonna try to like have a family and you're convinced of it, then maybe you don't need to shave your legs. Maybe that's not an important thing for you. Or maybe you find like the weird guy who just doesn't care. He loves you for who you are, and that's kind of sweet, right? He doesn't care if you shave your legs or not. He just loves you for who you are. That's cool. But the general reason why you shave your legs is to alert people that you kind of have it together. You care about cleaning yourself up and making yourself look nice. It's a way of letting the man know maybe you should try asking me out, right? Because those young women actually want the young men to ask them out. Later, she like has all these problems where she has BO and she doesn't get that. Everyone knows about sex and she doesn't get that. That's where she was talking about not being able to read. Her kind of like weird. All right, so here's where the religion comes in. She doesn't know if she's gay or trans or not, and she needs a third option. This is where it gets spiritual. So she likes androgyny. She isn't sure if she wants to be a man and have sex with men, or if she wants to have sex with women. And so, am I trans? Am I gay? And so the religious kind of third option emerges, where I was born with two half souls, one female and one male. So genderqueer is basically a single term to describe an inexpressible feeling of sadness or dissatisfaction with her gender that she believes cannot be expressed by just the term transgender. She needs spiritual language to contextualize this, down to like the plant growing and each leaf of the plant representing a feeling. Later she talks about reading her mom's, like pagan books and having like college friends who are pagan priests. A lot of these things you can tell there's a psychological problem here. So she has to go get a pap smear, right? Like a routine physical exam for a woman. And for her, this is extremely painful to the point where she's describing it as a torturous, life-changing experience where she's afraid to ever do it. But it's something you need to do as a medical thing. So is it a physical problem where she just feels pain, or is it a psychological problem where she's uncomfortable being a woman, and the pap smear is too visceral a reminder that she's a woman and she has a vagina, and so she can't physically get through it. But what's being made clear here is there's a difference, I think, between a trender who just like dresses up that way because they think it's cool or they'll get some money, and a person who legitimately seems to have like a psychological problem that's inhibiting them. Like it isn't normal that a routine physical exam should basically be like torture to you. There's either a physical thing that's wrong, where we've got to, I don't know, someone's got to find a physical way around the problem, or there's a psychological problem where you need a therapist, you need to work out why it is you can't even get like a routine health exam or change your period pad. This kind of illustrates where it goes from identify as this to participate in our political movement. So she thinks she might be asexual, and she sees all the asexual kids with the funny signs. Why have sex when you can have cake? How about we just cuddle? Asexuals have other things on their mind. I don't know. I could be asexual, but even if I was asexual, I would still hate everybody here with a passion. This is so obnoxious, right? So where I think LGBTQ as a philosophy fails is it doesn't leave any room for the person who's trans or the person who's gay, who just doesn't have any patience for this LGBTQ political activism. Stuff like, if I were gay, I would never want to march in one of your guys' events. If I were gay, my thoughts on economics and free trade policy wouldn't change one bit. I would still be voting Republican if I was a gay #1 Marmaduke fan or trans #1 Marmaduke fan. So I guess that's the question these books kind of pose, is this is clearly the emergence of a counterculture that is too different than the traditional Christian culture. Like, we can't live together, we can't get along very well because we just believe two different, very different things about the world. But can your worldview allow for someone who is different or who doesn't adopt your worldview to exist in your society? And I actually kind of see how in a more Christian, more conservative culture, we could be tolerant of these different perspectives, basically by understanding these are exceptions to the general rule. These aren't an exception to the general rule doesn't mean the general rule doesn't exist. There are clearly people who, in their internal psychology, can't be comfortable living as the gender they were born. And I think these people just need help. They need compassion. But we can't. We don't solve the problem by pretending we can fix the problem by voting Democrats. This is one of the reasons I think there was such a meltdown over Hillary Clinton losing, is for people who thought they were on the right side of history and we were moving towards a utopia. A Donald Trump victory, even though he's probably like the most pro-gay rights Republican who's ever run, even though like Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama were both for traditional marriage before they were against it. For people who orient their entire political ideology around this, being on the right side of history is the closest thing they have to heaven. It's the closest thing they have to hope that things will work out. And so them losing an election is sort of like them being told that heaven isn't real, or we're not on the right side of history. We're not going to conquer the world because political power becomes everything. It's just miserable. Like, be gay, be asexual, be transsexual, but don't invest all of your hopes and dreams into a pride movement or postmodern academic philosophy or the Democrats winning election, because you're just going to be disappointed. I highlighted this because she had a conversation with a cisgender guy where he asks a valid question. She kind of misses the point of the question. I feel like this word cisgender came out of nowhere. I'd never seen it before a month ago. Now it's in all of these online spaces. And if you don't know what it means, people call you an asshole. It's not hard to look up the meaning of a word. Google it. All right, so she's missing the point. Telling him to Google it doesn't actually address the problem here, which is cisgender existed, so why did cisgender suddenly become like a common word? Like, I saw words like safe spaces and snowflakes being used in their original context before they became like a joke on the internet. I read a lot as a teenager, so I was aware of like homosexuality. I was aware of transgenderism before those kind of exploded into the meme culture and the pop culture. And to me, that's like a really significant thing. Why did this go from being like a minor little discussion, kind of like of something unusual at the margins of society, to everything is about this? All the pop culture is about this. That to me is actually, that's the sinister part. That's the LGBTQ aspect itself actually isn't the sinister part. The sinister part is some corporate overlord deciding that this needs to be in every commercial and every movie, and a corporation that a few years ago didn't give a damn about any of these people. Now they've decided that everything's going to be. And even a lot of gay people would agree with me on this. They don't like when every corporation is changing everything into a rainbow. They waited until after Obergefell and it was popular to change everything to a rainbow to do that. Yeah, so maybe that could be like the unifying aspect, where conservative Christians and like gays and transgenders, we don't agree really on our fundamental worldview, but can we agree that we don't like the idea of the government or corporate overlords deciding all of these questions for us? Maybe we as communities and local people should decide some of these questions without them. This I marked because it's kind of an illustration of how like the boomer left doesn't get it. So like, her mom's clearly a flower child. an advanced degree into paganism, a vegetarian. So her daughter's talking to her about how she feels like if she had a baby, the thought of growing a parasite being inside my own body makes me want to vomit. Parasite. And so the mom comes later and says, I want you to know I never thought of you as a parasite while I was pregnant, right? That's a very traditional thing. Her mom has a child. She feels an attachment of love to this child in the womb, and she loves it, right? So she's like probably like a normie Democrat, pagan, San Francisco nature lover. But her feelings of affection towards her own child are loving, including when the child is in the womb. Her child doesn't know how to express her gender confusion, and so she expresses these kind of things saying like, I feel like having a child would be me growing a parasite within me. And this sort of shocks the boomer mom. So I think that Trump won over some boomer Democrats because they kind of saw that the Democrat Party was moving more towards the millennial woke culture, and they were like lifelong Democrats, but they know they're not millennial woke culture type. Like I wish I had a quarter for every time I saw some Democrat complaining about politically correct culture and safe spaces. Like the old boomer Democrats get that there's something wrong going on. They just don't see the connection that it's their worldview, the boomer hippie worldview, that created the woke millennial type of worldview. This emerges as a response to this perspective. Jumping ahead. Just another example. Autoandrophilia refers to a person being assigned female at birth who is sexually aroused at the thought or image of having male genitalia or being a man. So what she makes clear is she says she's asexual, but she's constantly fantasizing about like gay fanfic stuff. Like this is her obsession, right? And so she's confused because does that mean I have sexual feelings, or maybe I just don't want the trouble of having a real relationship with a real human being, but I love fantasizing about Legolas banging Gimli. That's sad too. Like if the thing you get out of Lord of the Rings is gay fan fiction, I feel bad for you, right? And so then you get like this incredibly ridiculously specific term to describe your incredibly unusual set of feelings. And the thing is, a word is supposed to... Whenever I see those stupid posts with like, oh, here's a word for the feeling of depression after rain. Yeah, when am I ever going to use that? That's too specific. Language has to be general enough that I can at least describe it in more than one situation in my entire life. But the purpose of something like this is to give you a feeling of belonging or having an explanation for how you feel. Now, all this really is just one word to try to sum up how she feels. She fantasizes as being a man without actually wanting to transition. She just wants to have the genitalia without doing the surgery or anything. So she thinks that having this equates to her like figuring something out about her identity. But all she really does, she just has a word for the thing that she couldn't explain earlier. She has trouble with gender pronouns. So she has a comics teacher who wants to use the pronouns they. She actually blacks out the word she because even in the context of saying this person is misgendering her, she thinks it'd be too offensive to use the pronoun she in that context. So she blacks it out and she forgets it too, right? So when the left insists on using these pronouns, like they get that they forget to use these pronouns. They don't care if you forget to use the pronouns. They care if you have a moral or conscientious objection to using the pronouns at all, because they sense that means that you object to our framework, you would object to our culture, you object to the world we're trying to build. And that's what's actually the fact that you think differently than that is what's offensive, not the terminology itself. I believe that a mature person could have a conversation with someone who believes differently than them on the use of these pronouns. Maybe something that stuck out to me is early on in the book, she's having like these simple little questions like, am I a girl? What's it mean to be a girl? What's it mean to be a boy? And then in grad school, she's clearly becoming a more hypersensitive person where she's learning about these things. Then she decides, oh, I want one of these pronouns to be my pronoun. And then she'll talk about how she feels physically hurt if someone doesn't use her pronoun, right? To me, that sounds to me like she's creating a problem for herself. I want to use these pronouns that are even unusual by the standards of the LGBTQ. And then if someone forgets to use those pronouns, I feel physically hurt. I know that toughen up is like too simple an answer to that, but you kind of have to toughen up to the point that you can carry a conversation with someone without constantly feeling attacked. Especially if you're using pronouns that are even more complicated or confusing than they, them, they. All right. So she talks about her aunt Patricia S. Churchland, Touching a Nerve, right? So this is her taking an academic book and just putting big quotes of it in the comic, but introducing the young people looking at this into an academic thing they may not have heard of. And what's kind of odd about it is I don't know much about Churchland, or I'm not a brain. I don't know anything about brain biology, right? But this actually isn't. I basically understand what she's describing, and this isn't a threat to my worldview at all. Because what Churchland is basically describing is that there actually is a biological basis for saying there is male brain chemistry, and so she's arguing that, well, some people feel gender dysphoria because their brain chemistry is different. The thing that was supposed to make them feel like a man inside that failed to activate. So their brain chemistry actually mirrors more closely that of a woman, even though biologically they are a man. So someone will say, oh, doesn't that prove that LGBTQ, all of these terms are valid? No, it doesn't. What this actually proves, I think this proves something different than what Maya thought it would prove. What Churchland is arguing here is that there actually is a general rule for the male and female biology. There are obviously exceptions, but these are the rare exceptions. And even if there are exceptions, there aren't more than an X and a Y chromosome. There isn't a chromosome for a third gender. These are basically genetic accidents that produce people. These people have dignity. These people deserve full rights. These people deserve respect and love. But what happens to them isn't the norm for 99.9% of the human population. So you can't use this as an argument for a social construct of, two-spirit genders. This stuff has nothing to do with whether two-spirit genders or gender fluidity is valid. The thing that is most relevant is, what if someone's brain chemistry is different than their biological gender? And my answer to that would be, then they deserve respect. They deserve to be, you should be considerate of the fact that their brain chemistry is different, but you can't reorient society and everything about the world around that unusual exception to the rule, right? What this is actually indicating is men actually have a really different biological approach to the world based on their brain chemistry. So actually that would kind of like enforce the point that there's something to being a man that isn't just socially constructed. It's how you were born and how. So she says, "Oh, I was born that way." Well, yeah, that means that cis hetero men were born that way, and it's a function of their biology, and they're the general norm, right? So I guess this is where it all comes down to it. If LGBTQ is a rare biological exception, it actually deserves a lot more respect and consideration and thoughtfulness, but the rare biological exception doesn't rule out the true rule that there are men and there are women. That's the true general rule. If it's all just a social construct, then that means you just be whatever you want to be. And this biology and this chemistry shouldn't matter to this. You could decide to be one thing one day, you could decide to be one thing another day, and basically that's where transtrenderism comes in, where you can identify as something just because you think it's cutesy bootsy, or just because you want to like fit into a crowd. It doesn't really have anything to do with your biological makeup. So I don't know. I'm not smart enough or knowledgeable enough of brain chemistry to comment on this, except that I think saying that people are born this way doesn't prove the point that they want it to prove. It actually tends to indicate that there is a significant biological difference between the way men and women think. All right. A very, very sad book. It's hard to read these, but I think every parent should read these, and I would just pay attention to what the libraries are putting out there in the youth section. So if you sat with me through all of this, hopefully you didn't get triggered. Hopefully you heard where I was coming from. I am very sincerely interested in this question because I feel like it's going to be the key cultural division of the 21st century. It's important to read about this. I just don't buy it. And I don't think that buying into the postmodern aspect especially will ever make you happy, because you're trapped forever in an endless series of questionings. All right, that's it. Number one Marmaduke fan. I love you guys. Have fun taking this out of context. Cancel culture. Catch you later.